Mist hung low over the jungle like a living thing, curling through the undergrowth and wrapping itself around the man who waited without moving. His suit, woven with layers of moss-dyed fiber and artificial grass, made him part of the forest floor. Dew gathered on his sleeves, small beads of water trembling as the damp air shifted. Beneath the camouflage, his heartbeat was slow, deliberate, like the ticking of a clock buried deep underground. Sergeant Ethan Cross had waited in silence for 3 hours. The humidity soaked through every layer of fabric, and the insects whispered their endless chorus, but he remained still. Patience was his weapon, discipline his armor. Through the scope of his rifle, he watched the clearing ahead, where the jungle broke into a landing zone of bare, black soil. Today, humanity was about to meet its new allies, or perhaps its new masters. The air shimmered. A column of pale blue light stabbed down from the sky, scattering droplets in every direction. The foliage hissed as heat met moisture, and the beam condensed into a sleek transport craft, metal smooth as glass, humming with restrained energy. Its ramp extended soundlessly. Ethan adjusted his scope, studying the beings that emerged. They were taller than humans, some glimmering with translucent skin, others plated in silver armor that seemed to pulse faintly with its own heartbeat. Their movements were graceful, almost too deliberate, as though they had rehearsed walking in gravity. At their center strode a figure encased in pale, exoskeletal plating marked with geometric sigils. The commander, no doubt. From the trees behind Ethan, his radio crackled softly. Cross, visual confirmation? He pressed the mic on his throat. Visual confirmed. Coalition delegation, 6 individuals. No visible hostiles. Roger that. Command wants us polite. Ethan's mouth twitched. Understood. I'll try my best. The aliens began setting up a small array. A holographic table projected from a cube that floated midair. One of them, a tall, reed-thin being with 3 luminous eyes, gestured toward the human base perimeter. Its translator module emitted a smooth, almost bored voice. This is your defense installation? Primitive yet quaint. Ethan slung his rifle and stepped out from cover. His appearance startled them. Their weapons shifted almost reflexively, sleek barrels glowing faintly before lowering again. He walked forward, unhurried, boots sinking into the soft mud. Sergeant Ethan Cross, representing Earth's Joint Defense Contingent, he said. Welcome to the jungle. The commander inclined its head slightly. We are the Galactic Coalition. We have fought wars across 12 systems. You were invited to join because proximity demands cooperation. However, we were told your species uses, what is the term? Projectile weaponry. That's right, Ethan said. The alien's tone turned almost amused. Explosions of chemical reaction, hurling bits of metal. Remarkable that you've survived this long. He didn't rise to the bait. Remarkable's one word for it. The tall alien extended a hand, its joints whirring faintly. Perhaps we will arrange a demonstration. Our plasma rifles are quite beyond your capabilities. You may witness the difference between ancient and modern warfare. Ethan looked past them, to the edge of the clearing where the mist had begun to drift back in. The jungle seemed to listen. If you want a demonstration, he said evenly, you'll get one. The commander's expression didn't change, but there was a soft vibration through the air, a sound like laughter translated through machinery. Excellent. Then we shall see how far stone and fire have carried your kind. Ethan turned away, back toward the trees. The forest swallowed him almost instantly. Behind him, the aliens watched the place where he had vanished, unaware that in the deep, green quiet, the earth itself seemed to hold its breath. Tomorrow, they would learn what humanity's so-called primitive weapons could really do. The morning broke with a thin veil of mist drifting between the trees, diffusing the light into a muted glow that softened every edge. Ethan Cross stepped into the clearing with his rifle slung low, his posture calm despite the cluster of alien soldiers waiting with unmistakable impatience. The Galactic Coalition delegation had multiplied overnight. Additional troops in shimmering armor lined the perimeter, their movements synchronized with machine-like precision. Ethan felt dozens of inhuman eyes track him as he approached the demonstration area they had prepared. He kept his breathing steady, tamping down the irritation rising in his chest. The commander from the previous day moved forward, its long limbs gliding with effortless poise. "Sergeant Cross," it said, its translator rendering the words with an airy confidence. "We have assembled a basic evaluation. It is not meant to belittle your technology, merely to contextualize it." The pause before the final word was deliberate, condescending. Ethan gave a curt nod. "Let's get on with it." A group of soldiers activated a line of floating spheres, each one projecting a holographic target at varying distances. The images flickered into existence, silhouettes representing armored enemies, darting and weaving in simulated patterns. One alien soldier raised a sleek, glowing rifle. It hummed as it charged. With a flash of violet energy, a beam shot forward and obliterated the nearest target, leaving nothing but drifting embers. The soldier fired again and again, each bolt striking with explosive brilliance. The coalition troops applauded softly, as though this display were routine and unworthy of real excitement. Ethan waited until the last particle of holographic debris faded. "Impressive," he said, and he meant it. Plasma weapons were undeniably powerful, but he also noted how the rifle's barrel glowed white-hot, tiny vents along its side trembling with the strain of dissipating heat. He wondered how many shots it could fire before melting down. "Now," the commander said, gesturing toward Ethan, "you may proceed with your demonstration." He unslung his rifle with practiced ease. It looked crude beside their shining weaponry. Solid metal, matte black, built for durability rather than aesthetics. Some of the aliens regarded it with bored expressions, as though waiting to witness a quaint but outdated tradition. Ethan checked his chamber, adjusted his stance, and took his first shot. The crack echoed through the clearing, sharp as splitting stone. One of the distant targets jerked violently as the round punched straight through its head. Ethan fired again, shifting to a moving target, then another. Each bullet found its mark with surgical precision. The alien's expressions fluctuated between surprise and subdued annoyance, as though accuracy alone didn't justify the noise or the kinetic recoil. "Projectile optimization," the commander said with diplomatic restraint, "is noteworthy. However, your technology lacks flexibility. Show us something more challenging." A squad activated hovering drones, each armored in reflective plating and equipped with nimble propulsion systems. They darted upward like metallic birds, weaving tight patterns. Ethan set his rifle aside and unfolded the tripod he had carried from the forest. The belt-fed machine gun locked into place, its design far more imposing than the coalition expected. He squeezed the trigger. A controlled burst shredded the first drone instantly. The others scattered, but his follow-up shots tracked them with unnerving stability. Metal fragments rained down through the mist. Within moments, the clearing fell still again, only the residual smoke drifting above the shattered machines. The aliens exchanged murmurs, some defensive, some uncertain. Ethan watched their reactions carefully. They wanted to believe superiority was guaranteed. That belief was cracking. Before the commander could speak, a tremor shook the jungle. Leaves rattled in the canopy. The air temperature dropped as though something enormous had displaced the atmosphere. Coalition soldiers snapped to ready position, scanning the undergrowth. Ethan tightened his grip on the machine gun. The commander turned toward the shifting shadows and spoke with sudden urgency. "Sergeant Cross, this was not part of the demonstration." Ethan's eyes narrowed. Whatever moved out there wasn't friendly. And both he and the coalition understood, in that single breath, that the real test was about to begin. The jungle erupted in movement, a violent ripple that spread through the brush as though the forest itself had awoken with predatory intent. Ethan dropped to one knee, angling his weapon toward the shifting shadows. Coalition soldiers activated their armor systems in a flurry of colored glyphs and rising hums, forming a loose defensive arc, though their unease was starkly visible. The tremors grew sharper, accompanied by a faint, chittering resonance that crawled along Ethan's spine. He recognized instinctively that whatever approached was hunting, and it was not intimidated by the Coalition's gleaming armor. The first Vornak broke through the foliage with terrifying speed. Its body was a lattice of chitin and sinew, plated in natural armor that refracted the dim light like blades of obsidian. The alien lunged toward the nearest Coalition soldier, who fired a plasma burst that splashed harmlessly across its carapace. The creature didn't even flinch. Instead, it slashed its serrated limbs in a blur, forcing the soldier to throw himself backward as the ground where he'd stood cracked open under the impact. Ethan didn't hesitate. His first burst from the machine gun punched through the Vornak's joint plates, dropping it mid-stride. The creature shrieked, a sound that rattled the branches overhead before it collapsed in a twitching heap. The Coalition soldiers stared at Ethan, astonished, but their disbelief evaporated as more Vornak poured into the clearing. "Form a line," the commander barked, its translator struggling to keep pace with the urgency in its voice. Armor panels snapped into defensive positions, and plasma rifles whined as they reached full charge. But the moment the aliens fired, they revealed their positions in luminous arcs of violet light, beacons that drew the Vornak like predators scenting blood. Ethan slipped backward into the brush, letting the ghillie's suit swallow him whole. His absence went unnoticed for a heartbeat, and then another Vornak dropped from the canopy, tearing into a Coalition trooper before vanishing again. Panic rippled through the formation. Their weapons were powerful, but their reliance on visible energy output made them easy targets in the dim jungle light. A single muffled crack split the air, one of the Vornak jerking into stillness mid-leap before tumbling from branch. Another shot rang out, and a second creature dropped. Coalition helmets swiveled toward the sound, but the jungle concealed Ethan entirely. The realization spread among them. Human projectile weapons left no heat signature, no streak of light, no energy spike. They were ghosts in the field of battle. "Sergeant Cross," the commander called, voice trembling despite its artificial modulation. "Identify your position." Ethan ignored the request. He had a rhythm now, a quiet, lethal cadence. Each shot he fired came from a new angle, preventing the Vornak from adapting. He watched their movement patterns, noting the flick of their antennae, the angles of their leaps, and the way they favored higher ground before striking. He aimed for joints, gaps in armor, exposed sensory clusters. One by one, they fell. Coalition morale shifted from panic to awe. They tightened their formation, following the patterns Ethan's fire was creating, funneling the Vornak into lanes where he could pick them off with ruthless efficiency. Plasma shots became more measured, used defensively rather than as primary offense. Slowly, the tide of chitin and teeth began to thin. A heavier Vornak emerged from the trees, towering over the others, its armored shell ridged with scars from past battles. Plasma bursts barely scorched it. The commander shouted warnings, but Ethan was already moving. He shifted positions, found a vantage point that allowed a downward angle, and fired a storm of armor-piercing rounds. The creature staggered, roared, then collapsed under the relentless kinetic assault. The clearing grew quiet except for the labored breathing of the Coalition soldiers. Mist drifted back between the trees as though reclaiming its territory. Ethan stepped from the brush, weapons still raised, eyes scanning for movement. The aliens stared at him with something new, respect, tempered by the understanding that their technology was not the pinnacle they once believed. The commander approached slowly. "Sergeant Cross, your methods defy our battlefield doctrine." Ethan met its gaze. "Maybe it's time your doctrine learned to adapt." The commander hesitated, then inclined its head. "Then teach us." Ethan exhaled, tension easing from his shoulders, but he knew this was far from finished. The Vornak had tested their defenses today. They would return, and next time, the real war would begin. The battlefield settled into an uneasy stillness, broken only by the faint hiss of cooling plasma rifles and the slow drip of moisture from the canopy above. Ethan surveyed the carnage, noting the jagged remains of Vornak bodies scattered across the clearing. The coalition soldiers moved among them with a mixture of reluctance and reverence, their earlier arrogance replaced by something far more grounded. They checked for survivors, recalibrated damaged equipment, and whispered quietly as though afraid to disturb the man who had saved them. Ethan cleaned his weapon with practiced efficiency, brushing fragments of chitin from the receiver. There was no pride in the task, only the familiar calm that followed violence survived. The commander approached him with measured steps, its pale armor streaked with mud and scorch marks. "Your intervention prevented catastrophic losses," it said, its voice subdued. "We underestimated both the Vornak and your capabilities. This mistake will not be repeated." The admission carried weight. Coalition doctrine rarely allowed room for humility. Ethan looked up, meeting the commander's luminous eyes. Plasma weapons have their place. They just weren't built for enemies like these. "Clearly," the commander replied, glancing at the dark shards of Vornak armor embedded in a nearby tree. "Your projectile technology bypassed every defensive protocol they possessed. It seems simplicity has advantages we never considered." Another soldier approached, holding a shattered plasma rifle whose overheated barrel had warped nearly in half. "Our weapons exposed us," it murmured, its translator carrying an edge of frustration. "Every shot gave away our position." Ethan nodded. "That's the problem with anything that glows. Light, heat, sound, they all tell a story. You've been fighting wars where brute force wins. The Vornak aren't impressed by force. They're predators. They sniff out weakness, not energy signatures." The commander's posture shifted, a subtle sign of contemplation. "Then your methods are not merely primitive. They are specialized." Ethan smirked faintly. "We call it adaptation." A silence followed, filled with the distant rustle of unseen creatures moving deeper into the forest. Coalition scouts began retrieving intact Vornak limbs and sensory organs, analyzing the patterns of damage caused by Ethan's gunfire. Their gestures hinted at a growing respect for the man who had turned the tide without advanced armor or luminous weaponry. After a moment, the commander stepped closer. "Sergeant Cross, we request that you join a combined task force. Your skills, your weaponry, and your strategic insight may be the key to countering future incursions. We must reshape our understanding of warfare, and you are uniquely positioned to guide us." Ethan considered the offer. He thought of the quiet hours spent waiting in dense jungles, the weight of responsibility each time he pulled a trigger, and the uneasy alliance forming before him. "If I agree," he said, "your soldiers have to trust what I teach them. Sniping isn't about showmanship. It's patience, discipline, and using the world around you as a partner." "They will learn," the commander said. "Today has taught us that our certainty was misplaced. We are prepared to follow where you lead." Ethan gave a slow nod. "Then I'm in. But understand something. This isn't about proving humans are better. It's about winning a war you didn't realize you were fighting." The commander extended a hand, and Ethan clasped it. Their agreement sealed itself, not in ceremony, but in necessity. As the sun dipped behind the dense jungle canopy, casting long shadows across the clearing, Ethan stepped away from the wreckage and looked toward the deeper wilderness. The mist curled around his boots, welcoming him back into its embrace. He knew the Vornak would return, stronger and more cunning. But so would he, armed with a coalition that finally understood the value of silent steel and disciplined resolve. Humanity had been mocked for its rifles, dismissed as outdated, quaint, irrelevant. Yet here, in the quiet aftermath of carnage, Ethan stood as proof that sometimes the oldest tools carve the sharpest edge. He lifted his pack, slung his rifle, and disappeared into the trees, leaving the coalition soldiers watching with a mixture of awe and anticipation. The war had changed, and he would be ready for the next shot.